The night was heavy with silence, but it wasn't the peaceful kind. It was the kind that seemed to pulse with unspoken cries. The kind that pressed against the chest until breathing itself felt like a betrayal. In the distance, under the cover of darkness, a woman staggered down a lonely road. Her hand clutched her ribs, her breath shallow, her steps uneven. No more pain, she whispered to herself, barely audible, her voice trembling with exhaustion. My ribs are already broken. The words weren't just about her body. They carried the weight of her spirit. She was a CEO, a woman whose face had once graced business magazines, a symbol of resilience and power. But now, stripped of her titles, her wealth, her security, she was nothing more than a hunted soul. Somewhere behind her, in shadows she dared not turn to face, assassins sent by those who once stood in her boardrooms moved with precision. Her success had made her enemies, but betrayal from those closest had signed her death warrant. Her knees buckled, but before she hit the cold ground, a rough yet steady pair of hands caught her. Careful, a voice said, low, warm, and firm. She looked up, through blurred vision, into the eyes of a man who looked just as broken by life as she was. His clothes carried the scent of oil and wood. His hands were worn, calloused. A single father, though she did not know it yet, who had no business rescuing strangers from the darkness. You're hurt, he muttered, shifting her weight against his shoulder. She wanted to push him away, to warn him. No, you don't understand, she rasped, tears welling in her eyes. If you help me, they'll come for you too. But he didn't flinch. His jaw tightened. His grip around her grew steadier. Then let them come, he replied, his tone carrying a quiet defiance. No one deserves to be left bleeding on the road. He carried her across the field toward his small wooden home at the edge of town. Inside, warmth greeted them. Flickering candlelight. The faint smell of soup. The quiet hum of life that only comes from a place where love survives despite poverty. A little boy peeked out from behind a chair, his wide eyes filled with curiosity and caution. Truth. Dade? He whispered. It's all right, no. The man assured him. She's hurt. We're going to help her. As he laid her gently on the worn couch, she tried to protest again. You don't know who I am, what they want. He silenced her with a look. Not of command, not of arrogance, but of conviction. You're human. That's enough for me. For the first time in days, her heart stirred with something other than fear. The hours bled into days. The assassins prowled the outskirts of the town, shadows lurking, waiting. But inside that fragile home, something unexpected was happening. The woman, who had been untouchable in glass towers, found herself mending wounds, not just in her body, but in her soul. The little boy, innocent and disarming, would sit by her side, offering her sips of water, showing her his drawings. The single father, Daniel, as she learned his name, would come in from long shifts, exhausted yet still finding time to check her bandages, cook her meals, and listen to her broken words when nightmares tore her awake. One evening, as rain tapped against the window, she broke down. Why are you doing this? She asked him, her voice raw. You're risking everything. Your son, your life. For me. Daniel leaned back in his chair, his gaze fixed on the flame of the candle between them. Because I know what it's like to be left alone when you need someone most, he said quietly. His eyes flickered with old pain. Memories of a wife he had lost, of battles fought silently. No one showed up for me. But I swore, if I ever had the chance, I'd be the person I needed back then. Her tears fell freely, not from the ache in her ribs, but from the fracture healing within her heart. The storm outside grew. The assassins drew closer, their presence undeniable now. She knew she couldn't stay. She tried to leave one night, slipping quietly toward the door, not wanting to burden the man who had already risked so much. But before she could vanish into the darkness, she felt his hand on her wrist. "You're not walking into that alone," Daniel said, his voice steady. "You don't understand," she cried, her body trembling. "They'll kill you, maybe," he admitted, his eyes unyielding. "But I'd rather stand against the whole world than let kindness be swallowed by fear." In that moment, truth. She realized something she had forgotten in her towers of wealth and power, that humanity isn't measured by titles or bank accounts. It's measured by moments like this, when someone chooses compassion over safety, love over fear. The final confrontation came sooner than expected. A night when the wind howled, and footsteps crunched on gravel outside the little wooden house. The boy clutched his father's hand. The CEO sat trembling with guilt and gratitude. The door rattled. Voices threatened. Yet Daniel stood firm, his frame blocking the way. He didn't have wealth, or influence, or an army. All he had was resolve, the kind that made even the merciless hesitate. Inside that fragile home, against the weight of danger pressing at their door, something powerful had already triumphed. The assassins could break walls, they could shatter windows, they could even break bones. But they couldn't touch the strength born from kindness, the unshakable bond forged by a stranger's choice to protect instead of abandon. And in that flicker of humanity, the hunted CEO, the grieving single father, and his little boy found something worth more than safety. Something unbreakable. The house trembled with the pounding on the door. Shadows moved across the windows, and for a moment, it felt like the fragile shelter would collapse under the weight of fear. The CEO pressed a hand against her ribs, wincing, her heart racing with the knowledge that these men would not stop until she was erased. She turned to Daniel, panic in her eyes. "You have to let me go," she whispered desperately. "If they find me here, they'll destroy you and your son." But Daniel shook his head, steady as stone. "No. You're not leaving. Not like this." The door burst open. Dark figures flooded in, their presence suffocating the small room. The leader, tall and menacing, sneered as his eyes locked on her. Finally, he spat. "You thought you could run forever." Before she could answer, Daniel stepped forward, his arms stretched protectively in front of her and Noah. "If you want her," he said with a fire in his voice that seemed to silence the storm outside, "you'll have to go through me." The assassins laughed at first, until they realized he wasn't moving. He wasn't afraid. He was just a man, yes, but a man willing to stand against all odds. That kind of courage unsettles even the cruel. And then, the unexpected. Sirens wailed in the distance. The assassins froze, exchanging uneasy glances. The CEO's eyes widened in disbelief. "The police," she whispered. Daniel glanced at her. "Truth, I called them the first night you came here," he admitted softly. "I knew you weren't just running from shadows." The assassins scrambled, cursing, bolting out into the storm. Within minutes, flashing lights surrounded the home. Officers swarmed, arresting the fleeing men before they could vanish into the night. For the first time in weeks, the CEO felt the crushing weight of fear lift from her chest. She collapsed against Daniel, her body shaking, not from pain, but from overwhelming relief. In the days that followed, truth spilled out. The betrayal within her company was uncovered, her enemies exposed. The assassins had been hired by those who wanted her empire. But their plans had unraveled thanks to one man's courage and one boy's innocence. She stayed with Daniel and Noah while her wounds healed. Each day, she found herself laughing more, smiling more, rediscovering pieces of herself she thought were lost forever. She would sit at the small wooden table, eating simple meals that tasted richer than any luxury dinner she had once attended. She would watch Noah's eyes light up as he showed her drawings, and she would glance at Daniel, the man who had risked everything for her. with a warmth that surprised her. One evening, as the sun painted the sky with strokes of gold and crimson, she turned to him. "You saved my life," she said quietly. He shook his head. "No. I just gave you a place to heal. You saved yourself by not giving up." But she knew better. It wasn't just his shelter that saved her. It was his kindness. His refusal to turn away when the world demanded he should. Months later, when she finally returned to her world of boardrooms and glass towers, she was no longer the same woman. She wasn't just the CEO who had built an empire. She was the woman who had been reminded of what truly mattered. And she didn't leave Daniel and Noah behind. Instead, she made them part of her future. For Noah, doors opened. Better schools, opportunities his father could only dream of. For Daniel, a chance to live without the constant weight of struggle. And for her, a family she had never thought she'd find. Years later, when people asked about the scar on her ribs, or the haunted strength in her eyes, she would smile and say, "That was the time I learned that kindness is the only thing stronger than fear." And every time she said it, Daniel would be there by her side, Noah grown taller between them. Proof that sometimes the most powerful miracles happen not in skyscrapers or under spotlights, but in small wooden houses, when one broken soul dares to protect another.